My name's Marcus Seidel, obviously. I guess as the podcast pertains to bodybuilding, I'll give you kind of an idea of me as a bodybuilder. I've been in the sport for over a decade now. I've followed the sport for much more than, more than 2 decades. I just grew up always playing, traditional sports, which got in the way of, me wanting to ever do anything with bodybuilding. So once I got done playing, I played college basketball. Once I got done playing college basketball, that's when I actually kind of dived into the sport head first, if you will, rather than just being a consumer and a spectator of the sport. I decided to start training like a bodybuilder and kind of pursue it. So I've been coaching clients. I've been a prep coach for 7, 8 years, something like that. Somewhere in that realm. It depends on when you start the stopwatch. I don't know what counts. I used to take clients for free back in the day and would just kind of help them. I don't know if that counts as taking clients or not, but I've been doing that for a long time now. And in that amount of time, I've seen the sport change a whole lot, but it's been fun. I don't see myself leaving this industry anytime soon.
Aside from bodybuilding for a second, talk a little bit about your basketball experience. And was that kind of a introduction to you in some ways into the world of working out, fitness, strength conditioning, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sort of. Yes. Like I said, I was an athlete my entire life from the time before I even really have memories. And basketball was always kind of my sport of choice. I played soccer, I played baseball, but basketball was always, my main passion. I'll even say to this day, still probably my biggest passion. It's just, bodybuilding and basketball are complete diametric opposites. And so you can't do both, and I'd had my fill of actually playing basketball. And when I got into bodybuilding, bodybuilding became the direct passion that I was pursuing, but basketball has always been the one that lingers in the back of my head. Like, if the if an NBA championship game was on TV at the same time the Mr. Olympia contest was streaming, I probably would watch the basketball game. Almost definitely would watch the basketball game. So still to this day, my biggest passion, despite me not being able to participate in it anymore, obviously. There's a very short lifespan for basketball players. Eventually you get kind of old and you're just not good enough to keep playing. So that was something I did from the time I was a little kid, always excelled in it, was able to, get a college scholarship for it, played 4 years of college basketball. And that was kind of the end of the road for me. There really weren't any professional opportunities. I probably could have tried out for some teams overseas and probably done okay, but I wouldn't have made a real living doing it. And I didn't want to move to a random. You don't just get to choose what country you go to if you go play professionally. It's whatever's available, and you never know. So what definitely wasn't even worth pursuing from that point forward. But literally the day that basketball ended was the day that bodybuilding started. I mean, I was mentally was ready for it before I even got done playing. So
was bodybuilding something that you were pretty vocal about as well? Like, hey, this is something I want to do afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Everybody that I was around, which, I mean, when you're a collegiate athlete, you're really kind of just around your teammates all the time. That kind of becomes your family. And, you can have a social life outside of that, but typically because you're around your teammates so much, they're part of your social life as well. So those were the people that I was around all the time, and they were all fully aware that was the direction I was going. I mean, even in mid-season, my senior year, I kind of had already started training that way. Which you don't typically do a lot of lifting during basketball season. I mean, it's not, there's nothing wrong with it. Guys do it, but it's not a super common thing. But that was the first year, my senior year, where I was like, dude, I don't even care. I'm going to go lift. I started training like a bodybuilder during my basketball season. Ironically, it actually ended up kind of making a difference. It benefited me in ways on the court too. But yeah, I mean, my mind was already in bodybuilding before basketball was even all the way over.
So once you got into bodybuilding, that was your full-time kind of working passion. Tell us a little bit about that, kind of that beginning of that journey.
It's funny because now I can look at some of these younger guys and girls coming up in the sport, and I can see the same things in them that I experienced individually when this happened. And it was just kind of an obsession. Like when you first dive in, and I think this probably applies to anything, but when you first dive into it, it was an obsession. It's all I wanted to think about. It's all I wanted to do. It was every time I'm in the grocery store or Walmart or whatever, I'm picking up the Flex magazine or Muscular Development magazine, which I don't even know if they still print those, but at the time they did. And I would buy them, which was stupid. I should have just got a subscription, because it was probably like 25 cents a month for a subscription. But I was buying them for like $5 at the grocery store every month when they would come out. So it was just consuming things. Of course, the internet, was always watching YouTube videos and educating myself on it. And it was kind of like a full-time job before it was really even a job. And when I say a full-time job, it's not like I was getting paid for it. Quite the opposite, in fact. But the amount of time that I spent on it was kind of like a full-time job. But that was 100% by choice. I wanted to, just because, it was an obsession. You couldn't get enough of it. So that was kind of how it was initially transitioning into it. It was just like a whole new world, because I had spent a literal lifetime doing nothing but consuming myself with basketball. And once that started to kind of become a chore, which it really is when you're a collegiate athlete, it's a full-time job, literally. And sometimes you don't want to be there, and it becomes a chore, and the passion for the game starts to kind of decline a little bit. So diving into something, more by choice, that's new and exciting, it was crazy. It was awesome. It was really fun.
So whenever you kind of first started to get into it and realize, okay, this is kind of what it actually takes, was there some kind of like moment where it was like, wow, I didn't realize, like, okay, I kind of followed bodybuilding, I knew what it was about, but then when you started doing it, did it kind of click for you, like it's a different level?
Not honestly, no. I won't even, the only time I'll say that I kind of had that realization was like right down the stretch at the very end of my first contest prep. But everyone experiences that. I experienced that down the stretch of recent contest preps, and I've been doing this forever. So I won't even say that. That's the one thing I will say is playing sports at a high level definitely prepares you for the life of bodybuilding. Having to really push yourself way beyond when your body tells you that you should probably be done. It was not really a new concept for me at all. The only difference I'll even say is basketball might have been maybe even harder due to the fact that, like, for example, if we're running line drills in preseason, there was no option of stopping. Like I would get chewed the fuck out, and cussed out in front of and let down all my teammates, who would then have to run more if I quit. So there was literally, I had the accountability of coaches and my teammates and everybody, and we all had that for each other, of course, to force you to get out of your comfort zone and push yourself way, way beyond where you would normally allow yourself to go. So as a bodybuilder, you don't have that accountability. You might have a training partner or whatever. And so, maybe a personal trainer, which I've never really had. Well, I shouldn't say I've never had either. As a bodybuilder, I've never had someone who actually trained me. I had one prep coach for a few of the shows that I've done. And I've trained with various training partners, but never like a very consistent one for more than, a month or two. So almost everything I've done in the sport's been done entirely on my own. So you have the ability to kind of stop yourself when it gets really hard. But having that background where stopping when it got hard was never an option. With bodybuilding, you don't have the accountability to it, but you also have the mindset of understanding how to get past it and just push, even when you don't really want to or even think that you possibly can.
So kind of, is that what you just said? Is that what keeps you accountable then? Is the mindset what almost keeps you accountable? Because like you said, there's not really anybody there to do that.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that I think it's a crazy dynamic from a psychological standpoint for me in the sport, because, coaching so many different types of people, there are a lot of people, I would say probably a majority of people who just have a completely different personality type, who don't view this the same way someone like I would view it. And so like when it comes to, for example, the diet, like if you're having cravings and you're deep in prep, everything needs to be perfect, you're going to have these crazy cravings, and you always have the availability to cheat on your diet. It's food is everywhere. There's never been a time in any of, I've done 15 shows, 16 shows, something like that. There's never been one time in any contest prep where I ever thought to myself, I'll have a bite of this or that. Like it's never even, it's just not an option. Like it was just, and I'm not trying to sound like fucking Mr. Tough Guy. I'm just saying like literally like I signed up to do this. No one's telling me I have to do this. I can quit at any time if I want. Like I want to do this. And although I want to cheat on my diet, I want to eat the fucking pizza I just saw on the TV commercial, I'm just not going to. Like none of that stuff is at the forefront of my mind. It's just that it's never even been thought of as an option. And then you start working with people and it's like 2/3, 3/4 of them will just cheat on their fucking diet and don't not think anything of it. Or some of them are transparent about it. Some of them will check in and be like, listen, I messed up. I did this. It was my birthday and I gave in and, something like that. But a lot of people just won't even, they're ashamed of themselves. So they won't even tell you, but they will also continue to do that. I kind of got lost. I lost my train of thought in the middle of that, but it is crazy. Fascinating is a better word, not crazy, but it's fascinating to me to see the nuance within people's different personality types that are participating in the sport, or even more so that are trying to participate in the sport. Most of those people who will give in to their cravings at every stop don't ever really end up competing, despite the fact that they want to.
Yeah. And do you think that those people who do kind of give into the cravings or maybe not go as hard as they could go, like, to the fullest potential that they could go at the, when training, like things like that, do you think that those people, or at least, I don't want to say all of them, but a portion of those people are almost just using bodybuilding as a more of a lifestyle tool than an actual, contest,
Yeah.
thing?
A better way to put that, I won't be as nice as you about it. I think most of those people are doing the sport for the sake of recognition and attention, most specifically on social media, of course. I think people see other competitors on social media. It's literally at your fingertips within a second if you want to see it. It's all there to consume. And so when you see a page of a good competitor, pro or amateur, or someone, whatever it is, and you see that they're getting this praise and you're seeing that they look so great and they're making this change in their life and they're proud of themselves and blah, blah, blah. I think people crave that. I think they crave that attention and that recognition for something. So they think it's a good idea to do. I think they're like, okay, cool. I want to look like that. I want to achieve what they're achieving. I want people to treat me in the way that they're being treated and respect me the same way, etc. So I should do bodybuilding. Maybe, maybe not, and it's like, if you can start the process and stay consistent with it for a long period of time, then maybe bodybuilding was for you. But if you're doing it exclusively for the recognition or the attention or the likes, the shares, the Instagram stuff, you're probably not going to get very far. And you're also probably going to be really disappointed when you do get that attention, because it's really not all that gratifying. Especially if you're not doing things 100%. That's the biggest thing, is like, these people want the recognition and they'll do kind of the bare minimum. And then, I don't know. People have a misconception about what they're going to get from the sport, I think, sometimes, and end up doing it for the wrong reasons. And like I said, I think those people tend to fail more often than not, unfortunately.
Yeah. And does it almost feel like, because the way you're almost explaining it to me, it's like bodybuilding to some, certainly not to everybody, maybe the sport hasn't turned into that, but potentially to some, bodybuilding is like the only community that they feel like they can live a healthy lifestyle, they can work out, they can train hard, they can be, have these characteristics. And it just so happens that those are bodybuilding characteristics, but they should be just like characteristics of everyone. You know, they should be characteristics of just like living a healthy lifestyle. That should be almost separate from bodybuilding. And, you know,
For
certainly
sure.
it is, but I feel like it's almost become this community where if you want to almost be accepted into a healthy lifestyle, healthy mindset, potentially you can just join bodybuilding.
For sure. And I think you're spot on with that. The parallel I can draw to that is I think we've all heard the statistic, and I don't know the specific numbers, so don't quote me on this statistic here, but it's something along the lines of like 95% of new businesses fail within the first year. And I don't know the real numbers, but let's just assume that's the real quote, the real statistic. It's obviously true if it's a statistic. However, I think it's very misleading because it indicates that no matter what, if you start a business, you're going to have a 95 or whatever percent chance of failing. In reality, what it is there's just a lot of people who shouldn't be starting businesses that are trying to start businesses for all the wrong reasons, that are never going to follow through with the things that are necessary to run one successfully, that are just attempting to do it anyway. And I think that's the same thing you see with bodybuilding. It's like you see all these people. I can tell you, even from my perspective as a coach, I have quite a bit of data to support this. A majority of people who hire me to do a show don't ever compete. They'll hire me, they'll pay me, they'll work with me for a while. They'll start to get a taste of what the life is really about. And then the next thing you know, they have money problems or whatever it is. And in reality, it's like, this is not what I signed up. This is hard. This is harder than I expected it to be. I can't follow through with this diet. I can't train this often. It hurts. It's whatever, whatever the problem is, they don't ever end up following through with it. And again, I don't think that's because it's just really unlikely for anyone to follow through with the sport and be a good bodybuilder. It's just that some people don't have the personality type or the mindset for it. And that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Just like it's okay to not be a business owner. The world needs good employees, way more of them than they need business owners. You know what I mean? So like, if you're a person who's doesn't have the characteristics of a successful business owner, then probably don't start a business. Maybe you have a great idea for one. Take that to someone who is a good business person and let them start that business, because you're most likely going to fail. It's the same thing. Like if you want to be a great bodybuilder, but you don't like to train, you don't like to eat the same things all the time, you don't get sufficient sleep, you like to party, drink, things like that, but you think these guys are getting a bunch of respect and attention, I want to do that. Don't go be a bodybuilder, because you're not ready for that.
Yeah, it's almost like the same thing you just said, like doing it for the wrong reasons. And whenever you take somebody on, do you almost try to find out why they shouldn't do it, or like maybe some kind of vetting process of like, what's the real reason you want to do this kind of thing?
I could probably tell you before they even start with me how it's going to go, or at least give you a pretty good estimation of it. However, I give everybody the chance to prove me wrong, and I don't say any of these things out loud. I don't say these things to them or to anybody else. I let them either fall into the category I assume they're going to be in, which again, most of the time they do, or prove me wrong. And I'll be honest with you, man, the most gratifying clients I've ever worked with, the ones that have been more meaningful to me than any other clients I've ever worked with, are the people who I assumed were going to shit the bed, who completely proved me wrong. I've had it happen a bunch of times. I had a girl who worked with me back in, it was 2015, if I remember correctly. I was doing nutrition for a gym. It was like a personal training gym. I didn't train anybody. I just did nutrition there. And this girl was a client of that. She had a trainer at the gym, and she met with me about doing nutrition. And then we kind of got to talking in my office, and she was like, I think I want to do a show. And let me just be clear before I start the story. She was pretty overweight, just definitely didn't have any of the characteristics I would assume that would make a good competitor. I wouldn't have even known, I didn't know what category she was going to end up competing in if she really went through with all of this. So it was all a mystery to me in the beginning. And I was just, honestly, at that time, if it was a client that I had gotten anywhere other than the gym that I was an employee of, I probably would have been like, listen, it's probably not a good idea. Like, let's just focus on maybe losing weight for a while or something like that. And don't worry about a show right now. Well, anyway, because I was an employee of that gym, I didn't really have the luxury of saying yes and no to people. I just had to take clients and do what they told me to do. Otherwise, my boss, who made money off of me, would have probably fired me. So I was kind of just like, fuck, man. Okay, I guess we're going to do contest prep. And literally from day one, I'm like, the only way this girl's going to be ready for a show, it was like a 20-week prep, which is a long prep for most people, but she needed every bit of 20 weeks and needed a lot of work within that 20 weeks. I was like, dude, I'm basically just going to I'm not going to start off as gradually as I typically would. I'm going to make it pretty much known in the beginning, like, this is the precedent. You're going to have to do all of this for this whole time in order to be ready. And I was expecting her to quit, within the first few weeks. As a matter of fact, it was like, this is a complete side note, but she came to my office like a week into her prep, bawling, crying. And I thought, hey, already, wow, here we are. She's going to quit already. It turned out it was something, I'm not going to go into details because it's pretty fucked up, but she got really, really horrendous news about in her personal life. And so she didn't quit doing any of it. She remained consistent. But again, it was still the first week. And I'm thinking, dude, she's already having these big personal issues that she's going to have to go through and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, long story short, she went through with it and looked amazing, like fantastic. Competed in the figure division, took second place. I believe she did back-to-back shows, if I'm not mistaken. And I think she took second place in both of them. The overall winner is the one who beat her in one of her classes. Just blew me away. It was one of the coolest transformations I've ever seen. And it was one of the most gratifying. Like, have I had clients that have looked better than her? Yes. Too many to count, but it didn't matter. Like, the amount of progress she made to get to the point that she got to, and the amount of work that she was willing to do without any complaints or anything like that throughout that whole time, and completely proved me wrong, was like the coolest thing ever, and I have tons of clients like that, but that's just one example. So I basically will give anybody that was a very long-winded answer to a very simple question. to reiterate my point, I'll give everybody their opportunity to prove my assumptions wrong. And I love it when they do, kind of indifferent when they don't, because it's kind of what I'm expecting.
It's so cool, I think, what we can accomplish as humans when we just like follow the process. It's, if we apply it to a passion, I think it makes it easier. But even things that just it's mundane almost, things that are mundane, things that are not necessarily very exciting things, but if we do it day in and day out, it would just be so cool.
That's a really good point, and something that is another thing that I kind of have to prepare people for when they decide they want to take this bodybuilding journey is the sport can be fun, but the fun of the sport isn't really, you're not getting that directly. The fun you're having is seeing yourself make this progress and change and improve over time. That's what's fun. Training's not really fun. It shouldn't be anyway. Maybe in the beginning, if you start like a new program, it can be kind of exciting to start changing things up a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, you shouldn't be changing things up very often. It should be very repetitive and very difficult. And every training session should be almost identical to the one before, just with a slight bit extra stimulus in one way or another, more weight, more reps, whatever. It is mundane. Training is mundane. When you do things optimally, it is mundane. And to be honest with you, man, it's really funny. So right now we're at a huge turning point in the sport of bodybuilding right now, a huge turning point. The open is getting, like professional bodybuilding, that is, the open is getting less and less and less and less interesting. There's less and less and less people excelling in the open. There's more and more people excelling in the divisions where you can be smaller, like classic and men's physique. Not that those guys are small. Those guys are huge too. But you're seeing genetics have always been paramount in the sport, but I think they're more important now than ever because people are doing things so far from optimally, and the genetic outliers are going to respond to all of it, and the ones who aren't. And I think what happens is people train for the purposes of enjoyment. And although I would love for that to be the optimal way of doing things, it just isn't. doing the same thing over and over and over consistently and progressing within it for as long as you possibly can is how you progress. And if you train that way, pretty fucking boring. I mean, it's hard work, but it's not exciting. You're going to the gym and doing the same thing you did last time. It's not really that fun. And same thing with nutrition. The people who see the most success with nutrition are the ones who will eat, and not necessarily the exact same things, but consistency, like eat with consistency for long periods of time. That's not fun. There's nothing really that fun about that. So again, like bodybuilding, the direct actions you're taking to be a great bodybuilder aren't necessarily all that much fun. And if you're getting into it thinking that it's going to just be this like recess from school, it's really not. It's really hard work, and it's really mundane work. And if you can be consistent through all that mundane activity for long periods of time and continue to give 100% effort, that's where you're going to see the biggest results. And there's some guys, I could name some names in the IFBB right now that are doing that. Some are on the come up. That Justin Shire, Justin Shire is, he won the heavyweight class at nationals this past year. I think I'm saying it might be Shear. I don't know. Shire or Shear. I don't know. Anyway, very genetically gifted guy. He's got beautiful shape and things like that. But I can tell you just by the videos that he's posting, the way he trains, he does everything perfectly, meticulously. I guarantee you every one of his back days are the same as the last back day, just with a little more weight on a specific working set here and there. It's boring. But this motherfucker is doing things perfectly every single time. And I can guarantee you, just based on that, he's going to end up being one of the best guys in the world within the next couple of years, because there's not a lot of guys out there doing that. There's a lot of guys out there that are set in their ways, doing their thing. And they're just, once you've gotten past that initial progress that you make when you first start, it starts to slow down a lot if you're not willing to do things that are kind of boring. And if you do the mundane shit over and over and over as hard as you possibly can, you're going to get as far as you can get. I'm not, there's never any guarantee as to how far that is. Some people will do things perfectly for their entire life, and the best they're ever going to do is third place at the local bodybuilding contest, but it was either that or something less impressive than that. So it's like if you can maximize what you're capable of doing, that's great. So unfortunately, that's why bodybuilding can be a bitch, is because you can do everything flawlessly every single day for a decade. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be Mr. Olympia. Doesn't mean you're even going to be a pro, It
Right.
doesn't even mean you're ever going to win your class at a local show. It just, unfortunately, back to what I mentioned a little bit ago about genetics, that's always going to be the number one thing in the sport. And you have no control over that. So, not only should you be willing to do the mundane, really difficult things consistently over a really long period of time, you should also be prepared for the fact that that might not get you that far.
How has social media, do you think, changed the world of bodybuilding, the sport? And, is it for the better, for the worse? Like overall, what do you think?
It's an amazing question. It's a very complex issue. So I'll do my best to make it as concise as I can. But I do like to talk, so this might get long-winded. One, it depends on who you ask, whether or not the sport has gotten better or worse as a result of social media. If you ask show promoters, social media has made the sport much better because they're making way more money. If you ask the higher ups in the NPC or IFBB, they love social media because, again, they're making way more money now. As it pertains to the quality that you're seeing, especially at the lower levels, like at the local level shows, the percentage of people who are showing up looking like they should be on a bodybuilding stage has diminished substantially. At the pro level, I would even say that it's actually affected the pro level, not to the same extent, but to an extent, for sure. People just don't look as good as they used to. And again, I think a lot of that is the reason behind why they're doing it. The other thing is there's the way information is disseminated through social media so efficiently. Sounds like a good thing, but when 3/4 of that information is bad, it's not a good thing. So you have a lot of people that are really confused about how to approach the sport, not even just competitors, but the coaches of the competitors, which I'll go down a whole other rabbit hole in a second. But people are using all kinds of crazy methodologies because it's all there. They're being thrown every time they open that Instagram app, they're being bombarded with, this is how you should diet, this is how you should train, this is this stimulus, blah blah blah. And it's like, we've gotten so far away from the basic stuff that actually definitely works, that, you know, you combine people doing things the wrong way with people doing things for the wrong reasons, and you get a majority of people showing up on a stage that don't look very good. Now, there's more of them. There's way more people. Like my first show, I think, had like 40 total competitors. That same show today, which is actually in a few weeks, that same show today will probably end up having like 200. So again, as a promoter or an executive or somebody who stands to benefit from more people competing, the sport, is improved a lot. I also think that it because they've added new divisions and things like that, I think that makes the sport maybe a little bit more accessible and desirable to the general population, whereas it used to just be kind of a niche underground meathead type sport. But to elaborate on the coaches thing, that's like the biggest thing that I talk about this a lot in private conversations. I'm glad to be doing it in more of a public forum, but the way that I think social media has hurt bodybuilding by far the most is, let me just back up. When I first started doing contest prep coaching, there were like 3 or 4 other people. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. There were 3 or 4 other people in St. Louis who were doing contest prep, period. And really only 2 of those people did it like for a living and like had a substantial amount of clients. That was it. So like if you wanted a local coach in St. Louis, you had like 4 or 5 options, and really only 2 or 3 that were like really coaches. Other people were just kind of like, people who maybe competed here and there, and they worked at Applebee's, but they also did contest prep on the side. And that was it. Since social media has not only emerged since that point, but also, grown to the point that it is, every motherfucker that's ever been to a bodybuilding contest is now offering contest prep coaching, because all you got to do is put it in your Instagram bio, contest prep, DM for pricing or whatever. You start posting pictures of your clients, and half the time it's not even really, they're always a lot of times very misleading photos, or who knows, there's all kinds of different ways to manipulate your social media page and make it look more desirable than it actually ends up being. And so now I can speak for St. Louis, but I could speak for the entire country. Whereas there used to be 3, 4, 5 contest prep coaches in St. Louis, now there's probably 100+ people that are offering contest prep coaching. And there are as many coaches as there are competitors almost. Like, you know what I mean? It's crazy. And I mean, just like I said, where there's more competitors, but a smaller percentage of people that are actually showing up in shape, it's the same way with coaching. There's way more coaches than there ever has been, but an even smaller percentage of those coaches actually know what they're doing or are qualified to really get people ready for shows. So how do you think that's going to reflect on all those people's clients? They're not going to look good. They're probably going to have a bad experience. They're probably going to run into some kind of health issue. They're not going to be prepared for it in any way. And they're going to make all these sacrifices, and then they're going to go take dead last place at their local show and not look good, and not, and then they're going to have a bad experience. And then what? They're not going to compete anymore. So it's just like, that's where I think social media has made its biggest dent in the sport in a negative direction, is the ability for anyone and everyone to just kind of say that this is what I'm doing. I'm a prep coach now.
And do you see kind of almost a circle back around potentially in the future, however long that may take, because there's so much, so much saturation right now? And you said, with the issues of potentially people, getting trained in the wrong ways, potential health issues, not faring well in competition. the numbers shrinking back down and almost like you said before, going back underground a little bit more?
I think that's already, well, I don't think it objectively is happening. There are, and now I can't speak for the last couple of years, but I believe it was 2019. I'm not going to say who I heard this from, but it's one of the most well-respected names in the entire industry. That's as far as I'll go with it. But they are a chairman within the NPC. So again, this information is coming from an extremely reliable source. But I think it was like a company-wide email with the NPC. They had said that total show participation was down. I believe it was like 18% in 2009. I want to say it was 19. I'm almost positive it was the fall of 2019 that this came out. And I think what a lot of promoters are doing is they're adding different categories. Like true novice is a new category that they never used to have, which I think is crazy. Like there's already novice, which should just mean it's your first show. It doesn't. Almost anyone can compete in novice. Now there's true novice, which it has to be your first show to compete there. So now you got people who would normally be doing maybe just novice and open, but they're doing novice, open, and true novice, or if they're over 35, they're also doing the 35 and over masters class. So now they're in 4 different classes. And so they're counting that person as 4 people. And so a lot of these shows are like, we had 600 competitors, when in reality, there was like 170 of them, but a lot of them crossed over into multiple different categories. And so the total number of bodies that walked across that stage was 600. But there were shows in like 2015, the NPC Midwest here in St. Louis had close to 600 total individual competitors. And it's declined substantially since then. And it's not just them. It's like all the shows have declined. Some have grown, most have gotten smaller. And I think it is a byproduct of that. I think it's definitely a byproduct of one-time competitors. Back in the day, like nobody was a one-time competitor. A lot of the people who I competed with when I first competed are still competing now. A ton of them. Most of these new competitors that are competing in shows now, they're one and done. It's bucket list people. It's, I want to just say I did it people. You didn't used to have that. And I think that's coming mostly as a result of they're not having the type of experience you're supposed to have in this sport, therefore not excelling at the level that they expected to. And then therefore like, why am I still doing this kind of thing? So
when it comes,
all of that goes back to social media. Like 100% of that goes back to social media.
do you see any potential like solving of that issue as far as like, because you don't want to necessarily say these people don't, you can't compete, blah, 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 unless this, that, and the other, but you also want to continue to make it a serious sport. You want to continue to grow it in not just the numbers, but in the other metrics as well. I mean, is there any solution to that? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there are some ideas that I have that'll never happen because, and this is actually not really going to answer your question, but there's some things that I think should be implemented within the NPC specifically that I think would make everybody's experience better. And probably keep people wanting to compete more, but it would require the promoters and the NPC as a whole making less money. So they're never going to do it. Like I said, removing the true novice should not exist. I don't even think the Masters 35 and over class should exist. And I'm going to be competing in it this year. I think the Masters should start at 40. 35 is like your fucking prime, like that shouldn't be a Masters class. Anyway, there's a bunch of different stuff there, but to answer your question better, the only thing I can think of that would be a solution to all the things that I just pessimistically griped about is to, I don't know who would lead the charge on something like this, but I think some kind of certification process for contest prep coaches. I think for it to be effective, I think somebody within the NPC, I think it should probably be an NPC sanctioned, like certification process, so that you can't just and I don't know how you would implement it, but you can't just coach people because you like went and saw your friend compete at a show and thought, oh, I can do this. I can put people in a caloric deficit. I can get people ready for shows. Um, I think that would be a start, at least, because I think it would deter people who weren't really serious, who were just trying to like scam people and make a buck off of them. It would probably deter those people from really wanting to do the contest prep thing. It's a dude, what I do for a living is a very like highly sought after job. It's fucking cool. Like what I do for a living is really cool. And so people want to do that. And the thing about it is with this, the way social media is and the way the sport currently is, they think that all you got to do is put it in your Instagram bio. It's that easy to become a contest prep coach. It shouldn't be that easy to become a contest prep coach. I think there should be, just like, you know, if you're going to be a personal trainer in a gym, you're going to have to legally have some kind of certification to do that. Now, does every gym fully implement that? No, of course not. But I still would think, you know, most commercial gyms across the country, I would say 90% of the people training people there have some form of certification to prove that they're credible, you know, that they should be doing this. And I think there should be some way to implement that with contest prep coaching too. Because I can tell you right now, if the test were designed the way that it should be, 90% of people offering contest prep coaching right now would fail that fucking test, and we could eliminate a lot of them. I don't know how to implement that though. I think those people have themselves convinced that they're good at things because they're able to obtain information on the internet or however, and retain that information for long enough to like make a post about it, for example, and put it in their own words or whatever. So they're, God knows how long they're retaining that. They might forget about it by next week. Whether they do or they don't, even if they retain all of the information that they're educating themselves on, information is just information. Taking that and practically applying it with an individual is different than knowing something. You know, there's, you know, that's become a pretty common thing again in this social media era, is people have taken it upon themselves to go get forms of higher education, thinking that this is going to give me the credentials above all these other idiots. And it's like, maybe, you know, higher education, college degree, I respect that, but you know a bunch of information. Do you know how to apply that information? And of course, if you have that education, you're probably a lot more likely to be able to apply it than someone who maybe doesn't. But there's a difference between knowing facts and taking those facts and applying them to an individual, and then being able to troubleshoot things when they don't go as expected. And that happens more commonly than anything. Listen, when it comes to science in the sport of bodybuilding, yes, it's important. It's an important starting point, but there is no exact science. There's no hard data. There is nothing that says if you train this way, 100% of the time you will get better results than training this way. That doesn't exist. That information is not out there. Same thing with nutrition information. Like, we're collecting data and it's not perfect. No data, almost no data is perfect. But think about something like gravity, for example. It's never been disproven. Like the concept of gravity, no one has ever, no matter how ruthlessly we've tried to disprove gravity, it 100% of the time always applies. There's no science like that in bodybuilding. It's just not there. There's a lot of stuff out there that will explain to us maybe what is probably the most likely way for something to work. So maybe that's a good place to start. But if it doesn't work the way the science told us it was going to, then what? Now you got to be able to troubleshoot that and logically make a decision to take that person in whatever direction it is that the data didn't indicate in the beginning.
Do you think that that's where a lot of like athletes in the beginning of bodybuilding, you know, whatever kind of mark you want to put that at, whatever year, era, whatever, do you think that that's like, let's just say the 3 sets of 10, like, do you think that the body that responds to that best was like the body type, or was the person that back in that day when that was the only idea, do you think that that was kind of like the person that succeeded? Whereas today with new information, different information, more personalized information, somebody else might succeed.
So here's what I think happened. If I'm understanding what you're saying, right, and I think I get it. Here's what, and this still happens today, but it was really prevalent before. This is where social media and the internet have actually maybe helped a little bit. All we had to go on in, back in the day before all of this was look at people who look really good and then ask them what they did, right? It's like, okay, this person has huge biceps. What did you do for your huge biceps? And if they told you, I lifted my dog every day, you'd be like, okay, well, I better go get a dog. You know what I mean? Like, what else did you have? Like, you couldn't just Google how do you get big arms. Like, you essentially had to just look at people who had big arms and ask them how to get big arms. And that's how people thought that you got big arms. In reality, that person that had big arms probably was just a genetic outlier, and they got big arms because they were fucking born with the right DNA that translated to big arms when they started working out. And that's probably the hardest thing to get people to understand, is they see whatever pro that they follow and have constant access to on the social media, and they want to train the same way they do. It's the same thing back with the magazines back in the day. I had Ronnie Coleman's entire training split, his every workout that he ever did. I could have followed that to a T. Does that mean that I would have gotten the same results as Ronnie Coleman? Fuck no. The difference is, back then there was no way for you to verify whether or not that was the right method. And that you still see that today. It's like, well, Nick Walker is bigger than everybody else right now, so I need to train like Nick Walker. And I think Nick Walker trains fairly optimally, so maybe that is a good idea. But just because someone looks good doesn't mean they're doing things optimally. And so now with the the internet and the social media and everything, the good thing is there is information available to you at all times that can kind of show you, like, yeah, I know you saw this big freak of nature and how they train. That does not mean that that's how you if you want to optimize your results, don't do what they do. Do this, because we actually have data on whether or not this actually works. So I think one of the most misleading things about this whole sport is just looking at people and just deciding that they must be doing it right just because they look good.
And I think that leads a lot of people down the wrong path of just, like I said, talking outside of bodybuilding. That leads people to not have the results they want. And, will they ever try again? I think it's a scary thing, because so many people have issues even starting, and then they get the wrong information starting off, and it doesn't work. They don't get the results. And now it's like, well, I guess I just can't do it. That's one of the scariest things to me, is people who are saying or believe that they just can't get results because they haven't in the past,
Or the exact opposite, like people who got results when they very first started because it was brand new stimulus to them, and they assumed that whatever they were doing in the beginning, when they gained that first however many pounds of muscle the first year they started lifting, that they should continue doing that because it worked then. And it's like, no, you could have done anything and gotten results the first 9 months you started lifting. Everyone does. Being able to train your mind out of like, okay, there's no way. Everyone should know that your first year of training, you're definitely doing it wrong. Every single person that has ever started lifting weights, your first year, you're doing it wrong, period. Just know that. I wish I would have known that better, at the time. If I would have, everyone can say this, but if I would have known what I know now 12, 14 years ago, I would have been a completely different bodybuilder. But again, everyone can say that. The fact of the matter is, like, yeah, you have to know, like, okay, one, if I'm not getting results, is it because I'm doing things improperly? Or two, just because I got results when I very first started this doesn't mean that I should continue doing this same thing as I progress, because if I'm not doing it optimally, that progress I made in the beginning is the only progress I'm going to make. You see both of those things probably equally commonly, I would say.
When a person comes to you, a new client comes to you, I think goes back to like having all this access to information. And but what are some of the biggest kind of like misconceptions and maybe some of like the funniest things you've heard when it comes to training and nutrition?
Well, I think the most common are probably just like the standard old cliche, like don't eat carbs past a certain time of night or you're going to get fat kind of stuff. It's like, you still believe that? And I work with some lifestyle people too, probably 50-50 at this point. I work with about half competitors and then half just lifestyle people. But there are a lot of like women who are deterred. The idea of hiring me is just really not at the forefront of their mind because they assume if they work with me, they're going to get big and bulky.
If only it were that easy, right?
Fuck yeah. I would look a whole lot different than I do now. Yeah, just I mean, it's like really the most common are the ones that everyone already knows, like the random cliches that if women lift weights, they're going to get huge, or if you eat carbs late at night, or if you eat period past a certain time, that's that's going to somehow change your metabolism and make you store fat, or I don't know. I mean, there's probably crazier shit that I've heard. I just can't think of it off the top of my head. There's just so much of it. I do my best to kind of tune that stuff out, but I also think I've been exposed to that kind of stuff so often now that nothing really surprises me anymore. So I don't really have a need to store that information in my head anymore.
Talking about bodybuilding and specifically bodybuilders, you've probably worked with some really talented, obviously, genes, like you said, play a big role in it. But what is that? Or maybe it's not one thing. What are some important traits, characteristics of a person who's going to be successful in this sport?
Well, like I said, and you kind of reiterated, genetics. Like if someone comes to me that I can tell immediately from day one they have good genetics, they're already like they have a huge head start over everybody. But that's not even really worth discussing. You're talking more of like a mindset kind of thing, like characteristics of the person more so than the characteristics of their existing physique. People who are just willing to follow the plan and don't overthink it. Like, to be honest with you, there are some people who I've worked with who are extremely gifted. I won't use any names, but kind of have the mindset that they already know everything. I'm a pro. I look like this. Like I don't agree with this, and because I am already more advanced in the sport than you, I'm just going to do it my way. Those kind of people, they'll probably still be successful because they're genetics, but they could be substantially more successful if they would take more of the beginner's mindset of like, I'm a blank slate. I'm going to do exactly what you tell me to do. And I'm not going to, we can discuss it. We can have dialogue, but don't question it from a skeptical standpoint and just follow it. There's really no indication when I take somebody on by looking at their genetics to determine whether or not they're going to be a successful client, at least from my perspective, because again, like the story I told earlier about the girl who really has no genetics for this sport whatsoever. She was just willing to do it. She was just willing to do whatever it was I told her to do to get there. And those are the types of people who are going to be as successful as they're capable of being, genetics aside. The people who are willing to just work and not say, are you sure this? I don't think this seems wrong. And then go ask a bunch of other people, what's your opinion on this? He told me to do this. Do you think I should be doing this? And that person doesn't have any context. And now they're thinking a bunch of different shit, and they're trying different things, and they're combining protocols that conflict with each other. And those people aren't going to be as successful as they could. So really just people who are willing to just do the work and not really question it. That's kind of the whole point of a coach. That's why most coaches who still compete, myself included, work with coaches. I'm not anymore, but when I did, despite all the knowledge I have, I shut the fuck up, and my coach told me what to do. And I never asked, unless I was confused about something, I never asked questions. I never disputed whether or not this was a good idea or not. I just did it because that's why I have you as a coach. I know how to get myself in shape. I don't want to think. You tell me what to do and I'll just do it. I think some people hire a coach and then turn their thinking caps on, or put their thinking caps on, like, okay, now I have this coach. Now I'm going to meticulously judge everything they tell me to do. Then they end up not doing all of it. So anyway, yeah, like to be more concise and just answer your question, people who are just willing to do the work and not question everything.
I don't know if it's true, but it just feels like there's these two spectrums of like people who have the genetic gift and then the people who have the extreme work ethic, and obviously when you get those two together, those two gifts, really, they're both gifts together, you do get the world class, you get the people who are
Olympia
on top of it all. Yeah.
That's what you have at the Mr. Olympia contest. Every class, every category at the Mr. Olympia contest is people who have incredible genetics who also worked harder than everybody else. That's it. So like legitimately what I was saying earlier, anyone who's willing to do the work consistently, no matter how mundane and difficult it is for long periods of time, is going to get as far as they can possibly get. If you have incredible genetics, that's where you can go. And that's where those people have gone. Those people, nobody just like casually walked in and ended up at the Mr. Olympia contest. Great genetics or not, I personally know people who have better genetics than a lot of the guys and girls competing at the current Olympia that aren't competing there. And it's because they're not doing shit. You know, you get a lot of people who have superior genetics who have relied on those superior genetics their entire life. And this is super relatable to basketball. You get these kids that are 6'6" in 8th grade, or, you know, or even taller. Shit. When I was in 8th grade, we played against a kid that was 6'11" in 8th grade. Probably never worked a day in his life. He didn't give a shit. He was 6'11" in 8th grade. He was going to whatever college he wanted to go to and was probably going to get drafted into the NBA because he's 6'11". He probably grew another inch or so. So it's like, is he going to be great in the NBA though? Probably not if he's not working hard. It's the same thing with like some of these bodybuilders can step into these local level shows and smoke everybody on a 6-8 week prep, hardly try, don't even have to do any cardio. And as they move up through the ranks, relying on those genetics, they start to realize, oh shit, I actually have to try hard now too. You know, and the better the genetics, the further they'll get without it. But like I have personal friends who are IFBB pros who I think have the potential or had the potential to be competing on an Olympia stage year after year and never even came close to making it because they just didn't care to try hard. But the, you know, and that's where it's the most glaring. You know, I had the same thing with basketball. I had friends that were, you know, genetics are the only sport where genetics are as important as bodybuilding is basketball. I don't have the best genetics for, definitely not for basketball, but not the greatest for bodybuilding either. But I made it real hard on myself. But you've got these kids that are 7 feet tall, you know, like that's pure genetics. Like there's nothing you can do to make yourself taller. You're just going to be how tall you are. And if you're really tall, you're automatically way high, like a way higher priority for, you know, colleges and of course in the pros. And the average height of an NBA basketball player is 6'7". The average dude walking around on an NBA court is 6'7". Like a lot of people have never even seen a 6'7" person. Every team has at least 1 to 3 7-foot tall guys. Most people have never even seen a 7-foot tall guy. That's purely genetics, but there are enough 7-foot people on this planet that there are a lot of them who never even came close to the NBA that probably could have if they would have just worked really hard. But being 7 feet tall got them as far as they could go without having to work hard. And that's where they kind of gave up. So it's the same thing with bodybuilding. There's people with great genetics that don't go far. Then there's people with bad genetics that quit in the first 2 weeks. But there's also outliers in the opposite direction. You know, there's people with horrible genetics that turn pro because they just grinded every year. And then the next thing you know, they fucking made it, you know. And then there's people who have incredible genetics and they do that year after year. Brandon Curry is a great example of that. People don't know this. Brandon Curry turned pro in 2008 and had already been competing for a while. Like this dude's not like, he's old. He's been doing this forever. No one ever expected Brandon Curry to ever win an Olympia. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm a huge critic of Brandon Curry. But no one ever predicted Brandon. If you've been around the sport as long as I have, you know that no one ever predicted Brandon Curry to be an Olympia winner or even someone who was going to be close. With the supreme genetics he had, he continued working every year. And sure enough, he's one of the 16, I think, guys. I don't think there's been a 17th yet. There's only been 16 people, I believe, that have ever won the Mr. Olympia contest. And despite, you know, no one ever believing it, Brandon Curry did it. And that's having good genetics and doing all the hard stuff for a long period of time.
Right. You know, we always talk about genetics as the stuff we can see, you know, or the stuff that's physical. But is the genetic side, could we also say that, hey, the genetic side is just as much the mental, you know, the work ethic as well? You know, is there a genetic side to that? I think
I don't know if I would call it genetic or not, but I think it does have a lot to do with how you were raised and the circumstances that, that things that stem all the way back to childhood. So, I mean, I don't know if that's genetic as much as it is just like an upbringing. If you grew up in a situation where you had really high expectations from, a parent or, somebody in the school system, or, maybe you didn't even have parents. Maybe you had to do everything on your own. There were some guys I played basketball with that came up in the the foster system and were passed from family to family, and whether they had expectations from their parents or not, they had to get shit done on their own even when they were little kids. So they people like that tend to have that mindset of like, I got to do I got to do this by any means fucking necessary, or it's not going to happen. And if you had an upbringing where you had high expectations, and I think that's another thing, a lot of the younger generation don't. And that's probably another contributing factor to why a lot of the local level people aren't exceeding in the or excelling in the sport the way that they could be, is because they're just not used to having high expectations of themselves, because they have never had to have a whole lot of accountability. So yeah, like I said, I don't know that it's genetic as so much as it is a product of your upbringing and just your past experiences and things that you've done. That's why I think like people who were like higher level athletes tend to excel in bodybuilding, because they've just spent their entire life having to do things that were really, really hard for the sake of bettering themselves. And that it's never easy, but it's an easy transition when you go into bodybuilding. Same kind of mindset.
When it comes to kind of people coming into the sport, we talk about kind of how it's maybe a little bit saturated with coaches and then athletes, who aren't maybe the most prepared or most well prepared, most maybe even sometimes serious about the sport. They're doing it for different reasons, things like that. But when it comes to a person who does want to, attempt this lifestyle, attempt the bodybuilding lifestyle, and attempt it as much as they can, a serious attempt, what would be your best advice for somebody getting into the sport?
I think one of the most important things, and I don't think that it gets talked about enough, is patience. Like, exercise extreme patience, because even if you're doing everything perfectly, it's still going to take a long, long time to get where you probably want to go. Now, that doesn't always apply. Maybe you're a first time bikini competitor, and the reason you're doing it is because you just look great genetically. Like, I had a girl that I just had compete a couple weeks ago in her first show, and she did a 4-week prep. Like, I essentially I rarely ever do this, but I've been trying to convince this girl to compete for years, just because it's like, you could fucking walk out there the way you look right now and probably do pretty well, which is exactly what happened. She decided at the last minute, okay, I'll do it. And I prepped her for like a month. I don't even like to take credit for her prep, because it was pretty easy. It was kind of a no-brainer, but she looked fantastic. Now, for her, that was like an immediate whatever. But if you want to be a bodybuilder in the actual bodybuilding category, or figure, women's physique, any of those, like, where you have to accrue a lot of muscle, where most people are going to have to do that and really radically change the way they currently look, patience is everything. There is no possible way, no matter what enhancement you decide to use, no matter what training program, no matter how much food, it's not going to happen quickly. You have to be patient, because if you're expecting to immediately, do your first show and then go to a national show and win and turn pro and then be in the Olympia stage within 5 years, it's not going to happen, man. It's just not. Not even the biggest outliers in the world are doing it at that pace. And so, and the biggest outliers in the world are also very, very misleading, because they're the like 1% of the 1%. And even they, again, Brandon Curry, to use him as another example, he probably started competing in, I don't know, 2000, we'll say. I have no idea what year he started competing, but probably in the early 2000s, he won the Olympia in what was that, 2019? Yeah. Like, 20 years of amazing genetics, had to work that hard to get to the apex of this sport. So it's like, that's what it takes, man. Like you're not going to do this in a year. You're not going to do this in 2 years. You're not going to do this in 5 years. And if you don't plan on making that long-term of a commitment, might not even be worth starting in the first place. So patience is really the biggest thing. You asked the question for someone who wants to get started in this. I'll go back to what I said earlier. Just know that your first year of doing this, you're doing everything wrong. And you should always be willing to be coachable and be willing to accept information that might conflict with what you currently think. Because if you're in your first year of lifting, no matter who you follow on Instagram, no matter who's telling you what, you are doing shit wrong, almost all of it. And despite doing things wrong, if it's your first year of doing it, you'll probably still have some success with it in the beginning. Just know that that's not going to be sustainable if you're not willing to take direction and learn, and then apply the patience thing, accrue that information, follow it for a really long period of time. So patience and be willing to learn.
And it's been really good getting to talk to you and getting to meet you. It's, like I said, it's cool to get different perspectives and different, people's experiences. And it's, I learned something. I pick something up every single time. It never fails. So appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man. Of course. I appreciate you having me. It's been fun.
So if people want to reach out to you or just follow you on social media, where can they do that?
Social media on Instagram. I just spent this entire podcast shitting on Instagram, but it's my last name, Seidel, SEIDEL _nutrition. That's my Instagram. Or you could just look me up by my name on Facebook. Those are the only two forms of social media I really use. My website, seidelnutrition.com. If there's any inquiries, you can always go there too.